evening, welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Nigerian ambassador to Sudan appeals for calm from parents and students as evacuation process continues. Outside Nigeria, fight intensifies in Sudan's capital as ceasefire ends by midnight. At least 11 people have died and 11 admitted to hospital after gas leak in India. My name is Okpayemuni. The Nigerian ambassador to the Republic of Sudan, Safiu Olanio, has said the embassy is waiting for the clearance from the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and NEMA on the buses and also the governments of Nigeria and Egypt to move the buses across the border. Olanio, in a voice message sent through the Nigerian Diaspora Commission, stated that a security clearance is what is needed for those at the borders of Sudan to move to Egyptian borders, and all that needs to be contacted has been done. He also clarified that the embassy was not in charge of procuring the buses, but is also following instructions from the Humanitarian Affairs Ministry and NEMA. The ambassador assured parents and students that the embassy officials are fully on ground in Khartoum, and as such, they share in the challenges from the war with all Nigerians affected. Ambassador Olanio further urged the evacuees not to take any action against the embassy officers, as had earlier been speculated, noting that no official is leaving the country until the last Nigerian has been evacuated. Here in Osun State, 16 persons were burnt to death and others wounded in an auto crash in the Odeomu area of Osun State. The fatal accident happened opposite a filling station and involved a white commercial bus and a white Lexus Jeep. Confirming the incident, spokesperson of the Osun State Command of the Federal Road Safety Corps, Agnes Ogungbemi, said some of the victims were burnt beyond recognition. She explained that those injured had been taken to a hospital in the town for prompt medical attention. The victims of the Saturday incident include 11 adults and 5 children, but only one person was identified and taken away by the family, while 4 others sustained injuries. The burnt bodies have been evacuated and deposited at the morgue of the Uni-Osun Teaching Hospital in Osogbo, the state capital, by the FRSC's rescue team in collaboration with the officers and men of the Nigeria Police Force or Odeomu Division. Elsewhere, operatives of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA, have seized 126 parcels of Canadian loud, a synthetic strain of cannabis weighing 63 kilograms concealed in a used Toyota Corolla car imported from Toronto, Canada, at the Tinkan port in Lagos. This is even as an attempt by a freight agent, Modi Samuel, to export 900 grams of the same substance, loud, hidden inside walls of a traveling bag containing food items to Kenya, was thwarted by NDLEA officers at the Sako export shed of the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, Ikeja, Lagos, on Saturday. Similarly, on Friday, NDLEA operatives at the Tinkan port intercepted 63 kilograms Canadian loud packed in bags in the boot of one of the 5 used vehicles of a container coming from Toronto via Montreal during a joint examination with other stakeholders at the port. Similarly, men of the agency's Directorate of Operations and Investigation attached to courier firms also on Thursday intercepted 1.53 kilograms of skunk concealed in old hard drives meant for export to Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Outside Nigeria, fighting has intensified in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, shattering the latest ceasefire aimed at allowing people to flee to safety. Today, the army said it was attacking the city from all directions with airstrikes and heavy artillery to flush out its paramilitary rivals. The truce was due to end at midnight today, but millions remain trapped in the capital where food is running short. The International Committee of the Red Cross says a plane landed at Port Sudan with 8 tons of relief supplies, including health kits for hospitals. More than 70% of health facilities in the capital have been forced to close as a result of the fighting that erupted on 15th of April. More than 500 people have been reported killed, with the true number of dead and injured expected to be much higher. Meanwhile, the first international shipment of humanitarian aid has arrived in Port Sudan following the outbreak of conflict in the country. The International Committee of the Red Cross said the 8 tons of cargo contains surgical material for Sudanese hospitals and volunteers from the Sudan Red Crescent Society, including anesthetics, dressings, and sutures. ICRC Regional Director for Africa, Patrick Yusuf, said healthcare workers in Sudan have been doing the impossible, caring for the wounded without water, electricity, and basic medical supplies. He added that the logistics needed to bring in supplies amidst an active conflict are extremely difficult. The ICRC is understood to be sending a second plane carrying further medical supplies and emergency personnel. Away from Africa, the head of Russia's Wagner mercenary force threatens to withdraw its troops from the key battle for Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine as casualty rates mount, while Ukraine's military authorities say Russian forces have been unable to cut their supply routes for the frontline city. Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin said in an interview that losses in Bakhmut are 5 times higher than necessary because of a lack of artillery ammunition. Prigozhin said he has written to Russian defense minister asking for ammunition as soon as possible. The withdrawal of some fighters from Bakhmut will be likely, but he warned that this would mean the Russian front line would collapse elsewhere. 2 civilians have died as a result of Ukrainian shells hitting a village in Russia's Bryansk region. Governor of the Bryansk region, Alexander Bogomaz, said shells hit the village of Suzemka to the east of the frontier between the 2 countries. Bogomaz said, according to preliminary data, 1 residential building was completely destroyed. 2 more houses were partially destroyed. Prior to the deadly attack, the governor had reported that a shell hit a residential building in Suzemka, causing partial damage and injuring 1 person. Moscow-installed officials in eastern Ukraine also reported that Ukrainian shelling had killed 9 people, including an 8-year-old girl in the city of Donetsk. In Asia, at least 11 people have died and 11 have been admitted to hospital after a gas leak in Ludhiana in the northern Indian state of Punjab. According to a top city official, the entire area was being evacuated. A team from the National Disaster Response Force was at the site today, while police were seen patrolling. Punjab's Chief Minister, Bhagwat Mann, expressed sadness over the deadly leak. Ludhiana Deputy Commissioner told reporters that deaths were a likely result of gas contamination. India was the site of one of the worst industrial disasters in history when gas leaked from a pesticide plant in the central city of Bhopal in 1984. About 3,500 people, mainly locals living in shanties around the Union Carbide plant, died in the days that followed, and thousands more in the following years. Moving on, people in Uzbekistan today voted on a constitutional referendum that could allow President Shavkat Mirziyoyev to extend his rule by 14 years. If today's referendum passes, presidential terms will be lengthened from 5 to 7 years. The change will allow the 65-year-old Mirziyoyev to serve 2 more terms and extend his term in power until 2040. Authorities in the town and the most populous former Soviet republic in Central Asia said an overhaul of a constitution will improve governance and quality of life in the majority Muslim country of 35 million people. The government also said the referendum would usher in human rights reforms. You're watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break.
Mandela was an anti-apartheid activist who gave his all for the elimination of what has been described as the world's most vicious rule of the unjust and man's inhumanity against man. He was born July 18, 1918 in Mvezo, South Africa. Educated and trained as a successful legal practitioner, he took up the gauntlet of a human activist against segregation by the minority of white supremacists in South Africa. At the climax of his trial for treason, orchestrated by the minority South African government, the great crusader for democratic equality was prepared to pay the supreme sacrifice to establish majority rule in his native land. He told white jurists that if achieving freedom for his people was worth his life, he was prepared to die. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island, described as the most notorious prison in the world. It was from this same prison that he came out as a free man to assume office as South Africa's first black president in 1994. Western Spring Television identifies Nelson Mandela as a watershed character in history. Funmilayo Ransome Kuti was an educationist and advocate of women's rights. She was recognized for her vitriolic comments against colonial policy of taxation as it affected the Nigerian women. Bere, as fondly addressed by her women followers, Funmilayo championed the initiation of universal adult suffrage, which gave an unprecedented leeway for women to contest elective offices and power to exercise voting rights. Married to a foremost educationist and teacher, Israel Oladoto Ransome Kuti, the first president of Nigeria Union of Teachers, Funmilayo Ransome Kuti was the mother of children who inherited her spirit of activism. Olufela Ande Ololari, the former, a renowned musical legend. She was the first female student of Abeokuta Grammar School and the first female to own and drive a car in Nigeria. The award recipient of Member of Order of Nigeria MON and Lenin Peace Prize, was born on 25th October 1900 and was killed on the 13th April 1978 by rampaging road soldiers in Lagos. Western Spring Television identifies Funmilayo Ransome Kuti as a watershed character in history. Born Jeremiah Oyeni Obafemi on March 6, 1905, Obafemi Awolowo was a prime architect of Nigeria's independence and most consummate advocate of free education and social welfare in Africa's most populous nation. Erudite politician, thinker, and philosopher, Awo was fondly addressed by associates and political colleagues, brought his unique attributes to bear on governance in the defunct Western region. He administered as leader of government business and the premier between 1955 and 1958. Obafemi Awolowo's premiership witnessed pioneering in multi-sectoral policy initiatives and execution. The Western region under his administration paraded several enviable records. First television station in Africa, first real estate in Nigeria, first high-rise building in Nigeria, first modern sports stadium in Nigeria, first agricultural settlement in Nigeria, first modern civil service secretariat in Nigeria, and first industrial estate in Nigeria. His face is on 100 Naira denomination as a mark of honor for his distinguished services to his country. Western Spring Television identifies Obafemi Awolowo as a major character in history.
Welcome back on Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now to the rest of the stories. The United States has accused China of harassment and intimidation of Philippine vessels and called on Beijing to end provocative action in the South China Sea after a recent near collision between a Chinese vessel and the Philippine Coast Guard Board. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said this in a statement just 2 days before President Joe Biden is to host his counterpart, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in Washington, D.C. The State Department also warned that an attack on Philippine security forces or public vessels would trigger a U.S. response. The U.S. was responding to a near miss between Chinese and Philippine vessels off the Spratly Islands, the latest in a long string of maritime incidents between the two countries in the restive South China Sea. The Philippines on Friday accused China's Coast Guard of aggressive tactics following an incident during a Philippine Coast Guard patrol close to the Philippines held second Thomas Shoal in the Spratly Archipelago. In the United States, the police are on the hunt for a man suspected of shooting dead 5 neighbors, including an 8-year-old boy, after some of them had asked him to stop shooting a semi-automatic rifle in his front yard in Cleveland, Texas, because it was keeping their baby awake. San Jacinto County Sheriff Greg Kippers told reporters that the search area for the suspect, 38-year-old Francisco Oropeza, could now be as large as 10 or 20 miles, as the gunman remained at large more than 15 hours after shooting his neighbors on Friday night. The shooting happened near the town of Cleveland, Texas, about 72 kilometers north of Houston. The sheriff said the suspect must still be in possession of his weapon, an AR-15 style rifle. On Friday night, the suspect started shooting off rounds from his rifle in his yard when some of his neighbors stepped out to confront him about the noise, Kipper said.
Anywhere now. We located the device that we were looking for, found it abandoned. There was some articles of clothing laying around. The tracking dogs from Texas Department of Corrections picked up the scent, and then they lost that scent in the water or whatever. So at this time, the area has went from 5 or 6 square miles. It could be as much as 10 or 20, depending on whether or not he crossed the Highline wire.
U.S. President Joe Biden said 92-year-old tycoon Rupert Murdoch made him look like singer Harry Styles, and joked that he was friends with one of the U.S. founding fathers, James Madison, at an annual press dinner. The president traditionally faces friendly jibes in front of journalists at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. 80-year-old Biden has announced plans to run for re-election and took aim at critics who think he's too old to do so. Washington's political and media elites gathered on Saturday night in the U.S. Capitol for an annual event whose mood ranged from traditional comedy gags to summer calls to free reporters imprisoned abroad.
At this inflection point in history, let us commit there will be a nation that will embrace light over darkness, truth over lies, and finally, restore the soul of the nation. Hear, hear. Ladies and gentlemen, can I give you that?
Yes.
I'm going to turn this over to Roy. Roy, the podium is yours. I'm going to be fine with your jokes, but I'm not sure about Dark Brandon. All yours, pal.
In the United Kingdom, the General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, RCN, said nurses have worked tirelessly with the National Health Service in England to make sure their strike is safe for patients. The RCN will hold industrial action from 8 p.m. today until 11:59 p.m. on Monday after voting to reject the latest government offer. The union initially said it would not agree to derogations, broad areas of care where staffing is guaranteed despite industrial action, but granted some exemptions on Friday in an apparent U-turn. Great Ormond Street Hospital is among organizations where nurses have agreed to derogations after it voiced serious concerns about patient safety during the walkout. Today, RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen said there are national exemptions in place for those really acute urgent services. However, Transport Secretary Mark Harper claimed nurses had not agreed national exemptions, which he said would clearly put patients at risk.
We have put national exemptions in place, and our nurses, as I've said time and time again, will never leave their patients unsafe or create more risk that's already in the system at this point in time. There are national exemptions in place for a range of services, for emergency departments, for intensive care units, for neonatal units, paediatric intensive care units, those really acute urgent services. We have put national exemptions in place. We've worked tirelessly with NHS England. In fact, it was the Royal College of Nursing contacted NHS England to ask for a process to be put in place so that we could make sure that this strike was safe for our patients.
Well, I think the thing that's very difficult here is that because they haven't agreed any national exemptions, it makes it very difficult for those individual trusts and individual trust managers to put in place arrangements to deal with those areas like A&E, like cancer treatment. It clearly does put patients at risk, which is why we urge the unions not to go ahead and do the strike. Clearly, if NHS staff are not working, I mean, all of those trusts are going to work really hard to put in place contingency arrangements. At local level, they'll all be working with NHS staff to look at the contingency arrangements and doing their best. But clearly, there will be an impact if nurses don't come to work.
Now to business, U.S. regulators are racing to find a rescuer to buy First Republic Bank in a deal that could be announced as soon as possible. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation has reportedly asked 6 banks to bid for the embattled lender. Shares in First Republic plunged last week after it admitted customers had withdrawn $100 billion in deposits in March. At that time, its competitor, Silicon Valley Bank, had collapsed, prompting fears of a wider banking crisis. SVB's failure was swiftly followed by the demise of another U.S. lender, Signature Bank. And out of some sports stories, Bruno Fernandes scored his 100th career league goal to boost Manchester United's Champions League hopes and end Aston Villa's 10-match unbeaten run. Fernandes pounced 6 minutes before halftime after Emiliano Martinez had turned Marcus Rashford's shot into his path. It sealed a deserved victory for the hosts, who had already gone close through Marcel Sabitzer. The result ensures United have a healthy advantage on the clubs chasing a top 4 spot, with Villa now 9 points adrift of the Red Devils, having missed the chance to cut the gap to just 3 points. Manchester United fans opposed to the continued Glazer ownership of the club held a protest at their side's home game against Aston Villa. About 1,000 United supporters gathered in Manchester City Centre before marching to Old Trafford. Fan group The 1958 also asked the fans to wait outside for the first 18 minutes of the match in reference to 18 years of Glazer ownership. The protest comes as the Glazers assess the respective offers of Sheikh Jassim bin and Sir Jim Ratcliffe's iNews Group to buy the club. Qatari banker Sheikh Jassim wanted to take 100% ownership, while it is understood British businessman Ratcliffe is willing to reduce his stake from 69% to 51%. That reduction would allow co-chairman Joel and Avram Glazer to remain at the club, something the protesting fans oppose. First half header from Jota was enough to settle a tense Old Firm encounter at Hampden, sending Celtic into a Scottish Cup final against Inverness Carly Thistle. A catalogue of Rangers errors led to the only goal on 42 minutes, with Daizen Maida profiting from hesitancy to provide the telling cross, Celtic will be firm favourites to complete a treble against Championship opposite on 3 June. While Rangers, the defending champions, face up to season without a trophy, the Others had chances to level in the second half, with James Tavernier hitting the woodwork and fashioned Sakala guilty of a bad miss from the rebound. Celtic, who beat Rangers in the League Cup final in February, could well have the title wrapped up by then, since they need just one more win to secure the Premiership crown. Away from football, Sergio Perez drove a consummate race with help from a safety car to beat Red Bull teammate Max Verstappen and win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Perez and Verstappen fought a long, flat-out battle after the Mexican leapfrog ahead by being able to save time by making a speed stop under the safety car. Perez had Verstappen's measure, holding him at just over a second behind for a long time before beginning to edge further ahead in the closing stages, and his second win of the year reduced the Dutchman's championship lead to 6 points. The Monegasque teammate Carlos Sainz took fifth, succeeding in holding off Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes, which dropped out of the top 10 after the safety car. Before we end the Spring Global, here's a recap of our top stories. The Nigerian ambassador to the Republic of Sudan, Safiu Olanio, has said the embassy is waiting for clearance from the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and NEMA on the buses, and also the governments of Nigeria and Egypt to move the buses across the border. Outside Nigeria, fighting has intensified in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, shattering the latest ceasefire aimed at allowing people to flee to safety. At least 11 people have died and 11 have been admitted to hospital after a gas leak in Ludhiana in the northern Indian state of Punjab. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. I am Okoye Mioni. Thanks for watching.